Okay, we're going to get started. I really appreciate everyone making time in this rainy weather, and it's so appropriate that we're talking about fluid and drainage, because if you look around, there's a lot of rain coming down, right? And when it doesn't have anywhere to go, what happens? It floods. Look at what's going on in Dallas. So we're going to talk about something that I don't think is getting enough wordplay, kind of what's happening in the brain and how do we ensure that the good things get into the brain and the bad things get out of the brain. So that is where we get into, your brain is your most important organ. It performs so many functions. Without your brain, you'd be brain dead. What does that mean? You're not living, you're not thriving. Your brain controls what you think, how you feel, how you learn, how you remember, the way you move, the way you talk. How many of you have anything, that's being impacted by your brain? It controls things that you might be less aware of, like your heartbeat, your ability to digest all this amazing food that we're eating here in Texas, your ability to detoxify, your ability to inflame, to anti-inflame. It's almost like a central computer that controls everything that's going on in your body. So digestion, detoxification, immune system, breathing, heart rate, your ability to respond to stress. Do you wake up in the morning and all of a sudden it's raining and so you can't go on your run and you're like, okay, and you roll with it? Or does that ruin your day? Your ability to calm inflammation, how you think, your ability to remember. I was listening to somebody at the booth and they were like, oh yeah, that thing, that fabric, that it kind of, it's plaid, it's kind of grunge. I'm like, flannel? They're like, yes. Like that word is on the tip of your brain. You kind of know what it is. You can actually describe it in great detail, but you can't think of that specific word. Your vision, your ability to regulate your hunger, your temperature, your body temperature, or your extremities cold or warm. And poor brain health can contribute to a number of symptoms. We're in a society where we kind of look at the symptom. We have a pill for every ill, right? But we're not necessarily looking at what's the root cause. Why? Why do we suddenly have autoimmunity? Why do we have brain fog? Why are we all so anxious? Why are our children so anxious? Why is everyone so anxious? Why do we have arthritis, eating disorders, a rise in autism, any kind of infections like bacterial, viral, fungal? Why do we all seem to have parasites? Insulin resistance and blood sugar, heart issues, digestive issues, detoxification issues, systemic inflammation, fatigue, even brain fatigue. You read for 10 minutes and suddenly you're exhausted, or you drive a long way and you're really tired, or your eyes hurt. Food sensitivities and leaky gut, nerve pain, heart disease, migraines, multiple sclerosis, mood issues, even things like cancer. So all of these are related to the brain. The different hemispheres of your brain control different functions. The frontal lobes help with thinking, problem solving. This is really your executive function, your ability to concentrate, to get things done, or to kind of power down and feel less overwhelmed. Your parietal lobes interpret how you're feeling. They process taste, text, texture. Any kid that has like sensory issues, they don't like certain foods. That's a parietal lobe. Occipital lobe are images and how images are stored with memory. This is correlated with trauma. And your temporal lobes are your sense of smell, taste, and sound. And they also play a role in memory storage. So we have all these important functions that the brain does. What does the brain need? What do we need to feed the brain so that it can do its best possible job? It needs oxygen and it needs nutrients. It's that simple, right? And how do oxygen and nutrients get to the brain? When we think of the anatomy of our body, how do they physically get to the brain? The neck. We're going to talk about the neck and how this is really an obstacle to healing. Because if the neck is congested, and we're going to unpack this, and we're going to give you really easy solutions, free things you can do right now while you're sitting here listening to me, and every day for the rest of your life, to make sure that the good things, those oxygen, that nutrients, get in. And the bad thing, anything that's kind of getting in its way and causing inflammation and impeding function, doesn't linger there, but actually leaves the brain. So the neck is really the highway in and out of the brain. And health only occurs when these good things get in and when the bad things, the toxins, the metabolic waste, anything we want to detoxify is eliminated. This is a quote I really like because people, we're all chasing symptoms, right? What's the root cause? What's causing these symptoms? What's causing these symptoms is an obstruction of some sort. Most of us have been in a traffic jam. There's an accident or there's road construction, right? And it's not just at the road construction that everything's backed up. Sometimes it's backed up a mile, sometimes 2 miles, sometimes more. And it's because there's that obstruction that is impeding flow. So the most common point for obstruction in our body is our neck, because there's a lot going on in our neck. We're going to unpack that a little bit. The other thing that's really tricky is that, getting remedies into the brain can be tricky. You can't do chemo in the brain because the molecules are too large. Pills have to kind of travel through the digestive tract. If your gut is compromised, it's hard to get remedies into the brain. And this is partially because our blood-brain barrier, which is an amazing security system. We want a good security system in the brain, right? We don't want some, random toxins to get in, but it just makes it tricky for healing nutrients to get in. Like we all know fat is great, especially omega-3 supplements, because they're actually the right lock to unlock that small key. They allow us to they heal the brain because they're the right size and liquidity to get into the brain. And this is one reason, so I'm going to give you a little coming attraction, spoiler alert. I use essential oils to access the brain and to open the neck because I find that they are the right size and shape. And so that's kind of what I'm going to unpack. You don't need them, but they just help to they help open things up. They help create space. We're either like expanding, which is what we're trying to do for health, or we're contracting, which creates these obstructions. And so this is just a way to work with you and everything else, everything that you're eating, all your amazing lifestyle choices, getting sunlight, blocking bad light, everything you're doing is optimized when the fluids in your body flow, because we are primarily water. And what happens to stuck water? Rivers are really healthy. Sometimes lakes and ponds aren't. Think of a fish tank, right? If you don't clean the water in the fish tank, what happens? It gets gross. What happens to the fish? They get sick. If the water in our body is stagnant, that is what is happening to us. But here's the wonderful news. Our body is designed to heal, and it's very, very easy to heal. So once you know this, you can't unknow it. And you can kind of help to make these changes every day. Like you brush your teeth every day. You can start to move your lymph every day. You can start to decongest your neck every day. You can do it right here while you're listening to me. And if you want a tool to do it, oils are fat soluble and super small, so they help cross the blood-brain barrier. And one thing that we don't really talk about enough is, most people have some kind of gut inflammation, right? Since glyphosate was introduced in the early 90s, it's really a steroid and it causes inflammation. So, if you think about how people get remedies into their body, most people ingest it. We ingest our food, we ingest our supplements. Not a bad choice, except if the gut is inflamed, it's not the easiest way to access it. Oils, just smelling oils, go directly to your brain and help to kind of create healing. And in fact, we just talked about the blood-brain barrier. It's about 8 cells thick in most parts of the brain. In the nasal pathways, it's only 4 cells thick. So it's just an easier way to get through. But I really want to get into kind of the neck, what's going on in the neck, and how we can unravel that. If you haven't noticed, I talk a little quickly. So if you're worried about grabbing everything, you can scan this code, you can get a full guide, you can stop by our booth, 483, get a card, get more information. So don't worry so much about grabbing every detail, just kind of pay attention. So the main thing is hydraulics. water fluid, waterfalls. What's happening? The water is going from high pressure to lower pressure. That's what's happening in our body. It's called hydraulics, and hydraulics is kind of the conveyance of liquid through channels. So if there's congestion downstream from the brain, so say our tonsils are congested, or we have dental infections, or the vagus nerve is toxic, or we have sinus issues, all these things that most of us have had at one time or another, right? That kind of interferes with the drainage. And also congestion downstream, so the neck. I'm going to talk about how fluid moves through the body and out of the body, basically the pathway through which waste is eliminated. There are other points that can be congested. The liver can be congested, the gallbladder can be congested, the gut. So we're just opening up, we're basically getting rid of the bottlenecks in the body to help make sure that drainage, poor drainage means that things like heavy metals continue to circulate, causing damage. And it also kind of impedes the ability of the cells to get the nutrients. If they're living in a dirty fish tank, they're not able to get the good things that they need. The other thing that we don't talk about enough is that when, we're all mobilizing toxins, right? We have these wonderful detoxification protocols, and it's great. We're mobilizing toxins, woohoo. But it's a little bit like, I see some people, if you were to yell fire right now and lock those doors, that wouldn't actually be doing anything. You'd all be moving around, but you wouldn't actually be leaving. So we need to make sure that before we start a detox protocol or engage in a detox protocol, that whatever we're mobilizing is actually able to leave the body. So we're going to get into the anatomy of the neck. What's really going on? There's the spine, there's the nerves, there's the lymph, there's the fascia, and there's the circulatory system. And I'm going to unpack this a little bit further. This is a graphic I had made for a book I wrote because I really feel like, it's interesting. Sometimes you look out there and there's so much out there in literature. There was not a good graphic of everything that's going on in the neck. It's so obvious, but yet it's so not talked about. You can't even find a good picture. You have to commission your own. So unpacking this, one of the most important things that's going on in the neck, we all talk about the gut-brain axis. What that really is you have 10 cranial nerves. They all start at the base of the neck, right here, and then they wind down through all the organs in the body. And they're providing bidirectional communication. They're, saying what's going on in the gut. They're then sending the message to the brain. The brain is then releasing whatever neurotransmitters or hormones to kind of help calm the problem. And we're assuming that it's like a game of telephone, that the message is getting conveyed accurately, right? Sometimes the message goes awry, and so even though the gut is saying, gosh, I need more stomach acid, or I need more motility, the brain isn't really responding. And so the nerve that seems to be the most beneficial in kind of gut-brain communication is your vagus nerve. It's cranial nerve number 10. And it begins, I'm going to give you a quick anatomy lesson. I like this graphic, also had this commissioned, but it starts at the back of the head and winds around both sides. I just want you to feel with me right now. I want you to feel behind your earlobe. I want you to feel that mastoid bone and that little divot. Here's one of the wonderful things about body mechanics. All of these reflex points are divots, which makes them easier to find. This is where your vagus nerve is the most accessible to the surface of the skin, and also the thickest. It's quite near a lymph node. So just doing this with me, if it's tender, maybe do it a little bit more. Just this alone is helping to stimulate your vagus nerve, and we're going to talk about what that means. But stimulating your vagus nerve helps to activate kind of healing. It turns on that healing cascade. So there are two branches of your autonomic nervous system. Your nervous system is designed to keep you safe, right? So if there's danger, you're going to prioritize survival. If the lion is chasing you, it doesn't really matter if you're digesting your food or detoxifying your nutrients because you're going to die. So we're going to allocate all those resources towards survival. That means routing your blood flow away from your core, digestion, detoxification, to your arms, your limbs, so that you can run faster. It also means kind of changing your ability to focus, concentrate, connect with people. You can't necessarily tune into your partner's feelings or your child's mood when, there's danger. It's like you hyper-focus. And so that shuts down your problem solving. You really, anxiety. What are we doing? We're hyper-focusing on survival. Are we able to problem solve when we're having a panic attack? No, because we are in that red branch, that sympathetic branch of our nervous system that basically makes sure that we don't die. And that's all that it cares about. And so it shuts down everything that is really relevant to, oh, yay, we're alive. We get to keep breathing, and our heart is beating, and we're digesting our nutrients. I also commissioned this one, but I made it to really show that, digestion only occurs when we're safe. I was that type A mom who had the kids' soccer practice scheduled close to dinner, so I'd make them a really nutrient-dense whole food dinner, and then I'd put it in a little container, and we'd get in the minivan and drive to soccer practice. They were eating under stress. It didn't matter how much time, effort, and money I put into that meal because they weren't digesting it in a way that the nutrients could actually be assimilated. And so many of us do this, right? We eat while we're working. We eat while we're watching the news, and the news lately isn't great, We eat, and maybe we're talking to a friend, and they're sharing something that is hard to listen to. And what's interesting is our survival response isn't just the lion chasing us down the street. I mean, I live in Seattle. I don't see a lot of lions on the loose. But, I do notice that I can't watch the news so much, but say I go to get a manicure, and she's got the news on, and I'm seeing someone got killed in a neighborhood over from, I leave there oh my God, am I gonna die? I really get so anxious and overwhelmed just from watching the news. Or my daughter is now 20, she's out of the teenage years, but I would joke, she'd come home from school and whatever, teenagers are on this emotional roller coaster, and sometimes I'd get on the roller coaster with her, and I'd be that is all this feeling of lack of safety. And the reason that we kind of get into that vicious spiral is because our vagus nerve is the gear shift between I need to allocate resources for survival. I'm choosing anxiety because it helps me anticipate every danger that might possibly happen, and then I can plan for it, and I, won't be eaten by the lion. And kind of, I'm relaxed. My daughter had a day, and I don't need to get on the roller coaster. I can just listen and say, I'm really sorry. That sounds like a bummer. Would you like dinner? It's much easier. Give me a second. So your on-off switch between stress and survival and digestion and safety is this vagus nerve that is most accessible right here. And this is what kind of turns on your parasympathetic nervous system. And it's a critical part of what's going on in the neck and how the brain drains. It can get infected because, the neck is quite an ecosystem. We all know there are a lot of pathogens in the mouth, right? It could be metal amalgams. It could be infections from a root canal, a cavitation, even, look at me, I can't even remember the words, wisdom tooth. The wisdom tooth extractions can become cavitations. And so there's a lot of toxins here, also from whatever you're eating. Where do they drain? How do they get out of the mouth? They go along the trigeminal nerve on the jaw. They sit right here, intersect with the vagus nerve, and then go down and drain in from the neck, assuming the neck is open. There is a Tufts neuroscientist that came up with this idea, vagus nerve infection hypothesis. And basically what he was sharing is that if there are toxins that sit close to the nerve, and they sit for too long, all of a sudden the nerve can get infected and it doesn't drain as well. So this is one of the things. It's interesting. I work with a lot of clinicians in clinical practice who work with chronically ill patients, and they all find that 99% of the chronically ill population has some kind of vagus nerve dysfunction. The vagus nerve isn't signaling, and so healing isn't happening. And so this is just a graphic to kind of show you the vagus nerve in relation to the trigeminal nerve. And there's also this idea that nerves have a high affinity for metals, and so they can be uptaken into the nerve and carried into the brain. also called vagus nerve toxicity. But it basically, when we're looking for the root cause, why do people have gut inflammation? Why do people have all these issues? What's going on? What's causing it? Why do they have chronic anxiety? Often it's because that safety signal, that reset signal, the vagus nerve signaling that you're safe isn't getting turned on. And this is just another graphic to kind of show how all of the nerves are connected, and the fact that sometimes there's what's called a retrograde axonal transport, very complicated word for there's a bottleneck here, and sometimes that travels into the brain and causes other problems. It especially affects like people who, I know a lot of people who have vertigo, tinnitus, they don't really know why. Why do I have this? It's often correlated to some kind of vagus nerve infection, and when we start to treat and unravel the vagus nerve, it often goes away. So if the vagus nerve is toxic, it kind of puts us in that chronic fight or flight state. It impedes our ability to detoxify because blood isn't flowing to the organs of detoxification. It impedes our ability to digest because blood isn't flowing to those organs. It impedes our ability to anti-inflame. It basically lies at the root of a lot of issues. And so this one little, it also, acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that kind of sends the anti-inflammatory signal to the heart, telling it to slow down. So it is the vagus nerve in the parasympathetic state that triggers this release. And it can contribute to a lot of the symptoms that we mentioned in the beginning. But here's the great news. There was a researcher who figured out that stimulating the vagus nerve, he actually surgically implanted they still do this. In fact, I know people who have it, a battery here and a stimulating device here, and it sends this stimulatory signal to the vagus nerve to help, activate the parasympathetic branch. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. We think about activating our calm by calming, by taking deep breaths, which actually activates the vagus nerve, by maybe doing yoga or going to a spa, but it's stimulatory. This is, I think, why acupuncture needles work. You're stimulating something. So stimulating the vagus nerve basically helps you turn on healing. It's most accessible right here. You can come to our booth, try this. It's a blend of clove and lime. Clove is super stimulatory. Lime has small molecules. And it basically, or you're welcome to do it yourself. But the thing that I like about oils and leaving oils on is it's almost like, you do this, maybe you're driving, someone cuts you off, you're like, that wasn't nice. And you start to spiral, maybe say some 4-letter words, and you're like, oh, look at me. I'm dysregulated. Let's calm ourselves down and let's see how the rest of the day goes. And you put this on and boom, you kind of continue, and it's still working even when you're on to the next thing. And it just turns on health and detoxification, inflammation. It's interesting, a dysfunction of a nerve due to poor ability to move will negatively affect the lymph and the lymph response, which can trigger an inflammatory process on the nerve. So I started doing this in 2012, 12 years, right? And I'm like doing it every day, and guess what? It's still kind of my issue. And I'm like, what am I missing? Like I know I'm doing this part right. There has to be more to the story. What else could possibly be going on? Oh, guess what? What else is in the neck? There's the lymph, the fascia, the veins, and the muscle. So the lymph drains down the neck, and spoiler alert, if it's congested, it impacts the vagus nerve. It's a little bit like, how many of you flew here to get here? Yeah. Have you ever been the middle seat on a plane between two linebackers? That happened. I'm like, I can't even turn the pages of my book. Like, this is ridiculous. Imagine your poor vagus nerve trying to signal, and the lymph is so congested that it's pressing against it. So it's interesting, toxins don't drain from the brain if the lymph is challenged. So we all have kind of like a brain car wash when we're sleeping. While we're awake, the brain needs to function fully. And then when we're sleeping, it's called our lymphatic system, the glial cell lymphatic system. The brain actually shrinks by as much as 60%. And the lymph fluid, it's like a car wash. It goes through, it cleans out everything, metabolic waste, intercellular waste. So the car wash, and then it drains down the side of your neck. Except if your neck is congested, and then it doesn't drain. It sits there. It sits in the brain, and you've got these toxins which turn on your immune cells, which cause inflammation, and then brain inflammation. You might experience it like you get a little tired, or you really can't focus as well as you used to, or you forget words, or you forget names, or it could make you kind of angry, or a little bit depressed because it's slowed down, or a little bit anxious. One of the things to think about if you're feeling this or if you're working with clients is what's going on with the lymphatics in the neck? I wonder, is it congested? And it's pretty easy to tell. We're going to get to this next, but you can just kind of feel, you can manually feel what's going on and what causes it. So neck congestion is really, where the body and the brain intersect, and it's important for carrying the good things in, but even more important for making sure the bad things get out. When you're walking back to your hotel or outside, if you see these big puddles or you see kind of a flood, what is that? That's fluid that has nowhere to go. So it's getting stuck in places it doesn't belong. That can be happening in your body. So congestion in the neck impedes movement, and just some of the toxins that we're dealing with. It's interesting. Lymph flows with kind of physical toxins, internal sources, external sources, but also some emotions. Like if you ever get a really powerful lymph massage, they'll say, like, take binders, this is going to move stuff. So there's this interesting research by Dr. Marco Ruggiero, where he literally took sonograms, the pictures you see to see the baby, of the neck. And he could see the vagus nerve, and he could see how it was compressed by the lymph. And he did this in chronically ill clients. He kind of did before and after photos, but of the lymphatic fluid in the neck. And what he found was infection or inflammation in the lymph nodes leads to impaired lymph drainage, and that leads to the accumulation of toxins and constant inflammation in the brain. So this is his photo. I'm not so good at reading x-rays, but it basically shows how the congested lymph impedes the vagus nerve. And so what he started to do was apply remedies, including essential oils, because we're going to talk about how they can kind of, they allow for expansion, not contraction, and also vasodilation and things that allow fluids to move. But for those of you that aren't super familiar with your lymphatic system, because I know they spend maybe a half day on it in medical school, the lymph flows from lymph nodes and filters out bacteria, viruses. It's kind of a pre-filter. It's part of the sewer system of your body. And then the lymph, all of the lymph in the body, this is the big headline news, all of the lymph in the body at some point travels through your clavicles, right here. So if you're feeling your clavicles and that feels a little congested, for any of the women in the room, if you've ever had breast congestion, that's lymph. If you feel under the armpits and it feels a little tender, that's lymph. If you go to your yoga mat and you're lying on your front and you're like, ooh, uncomfortable, that's lymph. All of these things are lymph. And don't worry, it's just it's a warning light. It's like the gas, the warning light coming on. You still have 100 miles to go. You're not, we're catching it early. But it's really important. I think it's like the most important thing that no one talks about is kind of making sure, if you ever have gone to, you put your car in reverse and then you think you put it in drive, but you actually put it in neutral and you're going nowhere. That's a little bit like what's going on if you're doing everything they're telling you to do here and you're not actually in their parasympathetic branch of your nervous system. You're just not going to go as far as you want to. And if your lymph is congested, that's another blind spot that people don't talk about enough. The lymph doesn't have a pump. Your heart has a pump, your lymph doesn't have a pump. It's really kept moving by breathing. This is one reason all of the diaphragmatic breathing is so important, because it definitely moves lymph. It keeps things going. Moving your arms, walking, rebounding, all of these things are great for lymph. But guess what? If this clavicle point, this critical point, is blocked, all these things you're doing are not going to work as well because you're getting everything to move. It's dumping here, and then this point is congested. Let's make sure we're opening this while we're doing everything else that we're doing, and it will work so much better. It's like, my gosh, my friend has, or my daughter has a friend from Chicago. They don't really have hills in Chicago. I took her on a bike ride. She didn't know to downshift the bike when we're going up a hill. They have big hills in Seattle. She's like, this is really hard. I'm like, let's try downshifting. She's like, oh, who knew? that's kind of what we're doing. We're shifting your body into a different gear so that we can make sure that the lymph moves. And the main points, it drains 75% on the left side. So you always start with the left side, 25 on the right, but you can see it kind of drains the liver and the gallbladder on the right. I see I'm kind of tight on time, so I'm going to cruise through these so I really hit the highlights. The lymph is also part of your immune system, obviously, and that helps with a lot of, with everything, especially with what's going on in the world right now. This is just to show you how close to the surface the lymphatic vessels are, which shows you how, like oils, topically applied oils, can really help. What they're doing is the lymph is congested, the fluid is congested, and it's a little bit, like you're driving in traffic and then suddenly, oh gosh, look, there's construction or an accident and only one of the 4 lanes is accessible. So suddenly nothing moves and then you go very slowly and then, oh boom, it opens up again. This is just helping to kind of repair the fluid flow more quickly so that it doesn't get constricted. Oils are really interesting. They're basically, if you go to a lavender field, you pick the lavender, you put it in a big vat of water, boil it. Oil and water don't mix, so one side is the water, the hydrocil, one side is the oil. And the oil is what provides a lot of the healing essence in the plants. It moves fluids, the roots are deep in the ground, the leaves are hundreds of feet in the air. It just makes sure that everything moves, and that's what it does for us too. We eat a lot of these plants, like ginger is really anti-inflammatory, and that's what it does in nature, that's what it does in us. Mint in particular is really, it can be cooling, it can be moving, it really helps to anti-inflame and help with lymphatic flow. This is great. There's a hyperbaric chamber here. We have saunas. This is a great combination. It just accelerates your healing when you combine it with other remedies. There's a great report in Science magazine that certain anesthetics, or substances that reduce sensitivity to pain can help increase the space between your cells. So all we're trying to do is get the body into the right gear so that things move faster. This is just another example of how close the lymph is to the surface. And you can come to our booth and try all of these, and I will give you a more detailed handout of how to really open the clavicles, ensure that you're getting healthy lymph drainage. And while we're talking about the gut can be compromised, we have other doors into the body. We have kind of the transdermal door. We've all maybe used nicotine patches, hormonal creams, even a cortisone cream when things are injured. What people don't realize, they talk about transdermal as kind of being a lesser channel because they're assuming that it has to get through the skin, into the blood, travel to the heart, and then travel systemically, right? That's not wrong, that's totally right. But there's a bit of a hack that when you put it on reflex points, then it kind of has a systemic effect. And especially for the lymph, when you go for those bottlenecks, the clavicle, under the arm, along the inguinal, you're really opening up all those drainage points to ensure that everything flows. You're kind of pre-paving the exit route. I like this guy, Perry Nickerson, Stop Chasing Pain. He does a really good video on the Big Six where he demonstrates everything. Do you know him? Oh, okay. And the other thing that he really talks about that I think is really important to understand is that pressure drains from higher to lower. And so you really want to make sure that you're opening up these valves at the top so that everything drains. We're going to hit the fascia before we leave, and then I'll open it up for questions. The fascia is another kind of blind spot because it wraps around everything, and the fascia and the lymph and the vagus nerve are pretty much the same thing. They're all interwoven, they all work together. Fascia is really impeded by scars, and your belly button is your first scar, right? The belly button's fascinating because it's how you got all the nutrients when you were in the womb, and it's a really great place. If it's tied too tight, it can constrict the diaphragm. So just rubbing the belly button, or putting a fascia oil in the belly button or a castor oil in the belly button, especially before you're sleeping, because a lot of healing occurs when you're sleeping. So I just want to kind of I'm taking too long, so I want to make sure that we hit the main points, right? If you do these 3 things, if we stimulate the vagus nerve with oils, without oils, do that every day. Do it when you're driving in your car, do it when you're on a conference call. This is just going to turn on healing. It's going to make sure that everything you're doing is amplifying. Your clavicles, it can be very gentle. There are a lot of people that make it, I've noticed in this space, there are the people that give you the information because they want you to heal, or they make it really complicated so that you spend money and go see them. I want to make it really easy. So we're just going to, underneath the clavicle, you can start on one side or both, just really gently, really, kind of tenderly massage, and just make sure that this is open. And then the next step would, I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember Star Trek with like the Spock fingers. Yeah, so you can just kind of Spock on the neck and drain. We have kind of a free handout that shows you how to do this at our booth. And then there's more you can do from there, but those three things, and then the belly button, just massaging the belly button. You can put castor oil in it. We have a fascia blend. Those three things are really, really easy ways to kind of shift your body into the right gear. You're getting yourself out of neutral. You don't necessarily need to be in, supercharged Italian Speedway drive, but it will just help. So I hope that was helpful. I'm sorry I talked too fast and ran a little long. Happy to open it for questions and also, thank you. Oh. And I guess we're really, I did like that aquarium analogy. We're really only as healthy as the environment that we live in. So there's so much fluid in our body. If we make sure that it flows and it stays healthy, then we're going to stay healthy. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, what's the oil for the belly button? What's the belly button oil?
That is our fascia oil, which is my absolute favorite, honestly, because I have this 80-year-old dog walker who I love, and she's like, I hurt my knee, I don't think I can walk the dog, so I gave it to her. She's like, this is magic. She bought like 20 of them. She's giving them to all of her friends. But fascia is, well, I'll just tell you, fascia is the web of connective tissue that permeates and surrounds your muscles, and it surrounds everything. We think of it as kind of saran wrap for the body, but it's so much more than that. It's part of kind of the connective web. It works with the nervous system to send signals. It works with the fascia to move things. If it's constricted, I mean, how many of us, I don't have my device, but how many of us are like going like this all day? Or we're on our computer. What is that? That's tech neck. We're constricted. What is fetal position? We're always like protecting our heart. And that means that our fascia is congested, So just anything we can do. I started using this. I hate to admit, but sometimes I cheat in yoga. There's certain things that I don't really do, like heart opening. I'm like, I'm going to phone this one in, or hip opening. I started using the fascia blend. This is actually the reason I created the roller bottles, because I was like, this is hard to reach. It'll be easier if I just roll it on. But just opening the back of the heart, it helps everything. It helps fluid flow, it helps my back pain, it helps everything. And then I put it on the hips too, because one of my yoga teachers said, what do we do with our emotions we don't want to feel? We put them in our pockets. So your hips get really tight, so that means certain things are hard. But mobility is the key to aging gracefully. And so how do we keep ourselves mobile? We ensure that we can continue to move. So it's a combination of emotional and physical. Come by the booth, you guys. You really need to kind of experience it and smell it and just see what it is. Are there any other questions? What's that? We're in 438. 438. We're right actually by the entrance to the keynote stage.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you, you guys. Yeah.
So one of your slides, I noticed it said something about meninges, and so I was wondering if someone gets a meningioma, is that due to maybe congestion?
I think that a lot of things are, there's certain things you can say and you can't say. I don't pretend to cure anything, but I think that making sure that the bad things drain can really help support health. Yeah. Oh yeah, here, I actually, I can give these to you. Yes. Any other questions? Thank you, you guys.